massacre of political prisoners in 1988 by Islamic government of Iran. The summary executions, systematic torture, rape, arbitrary imprisonment, and massive violations of fundamental human rights during the first 10 years of the Islamic regime of Iran following the 1979 revolution are crimes so grave that cannot be forgotten and without a doubt are the bloodiest periods in contemporary Iranian history. The atrocities of Khomeini and his followers started from the very first day of Iran's revolution as the newly established government consolidated its power by eliminating its opponents through banishment and execution by firing squads and hanging. Islamic revolutionary courts denied the elementary guarantees of fair trial and used Islamic laws that were vague and arbitrary to justify the imprisonment and executions of the citizens based on their religious or political beliefs. Accused persons were denied the opportunity to defend themselves and the courts were bluntly biased against them. The pinnacle of the widespread violence was the unprecedented extermination of thousands of political prisoners in 1988. In the summer of 1988, Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader of Iran at the time, signed a bitter ceasefire ending 8-year Iran-Iraq war and then proceeded to order the mass execution of political prisoners. Between August and September of 1988, about 5,000 political prisoners were put to death because they were not willing to denounce their beliefs. Khomeini named 3 people to create a panel dubbed the Death Commission to execute his commands. He wrote, "I hope that you satisfy the Almighty God with your revolutionary rage and vengeance against the enemies of Islam and show no doubt or concern with details and act ferociously." The Death Commission took only a few minutes talking to prisoners and alleged them non-believers and directed them to the gallows built temporarily in the prisons. The Revolutionary Guards hanged them 6 at a time and the meat trucks carried their lifeless bodies to be buried hastily in shallow mass graves at locations like Khabaran wasteland. These deliberate, systematic, and extrajudicial killings are not only crimes against people of Iran, but they are crimes against humanities. Not even Hitler or Stalin dare to mass execute political prisoners who have already been sentenced to prison time and have spent several years behind the bar. This atrocity is unprecedented in modern history. My brother, Lawdan Bazargan, was among them. He was arrested in the summer of 1981 when he was only 23 years old for his ties to a Marxist group. He was beaten, whipped, and tortured in prison. After 2 years of uncertainty, his trial adjourned behind closed doors without a lawyer or family member. The court lasted only a few minutes, administered by an Islamic clergy as a judge. The whole time his eyes were blindfolded and the Islamic clergy sentenced him to 10 years of confinement. He was behind bars for more than 6 years when suddenly on July 1988, all the visitations stopped. Since the government wanted to keep this summary execution a secret, they would tell only a few parents a day that they had killed their children. After 5 months of suspense, finally they asked of my father to go to the prison. Back then, my father was 62 years old and had black thick hair. I will never forget that scene. That morning, when he left the house to go and receive the news of his son's death, he left looking like usual self, and when he came back home, he was a husk of his former self as if he has grayed over the last few hours. The news of his beloved son's execution broke his heart. He collapsed on the floor and said, "Everything finished. They told me they'd hanged him because he had forsaken his faith and was a non-believer. I demanded his body, but they said he had no Islamic belief, so he does not deserve to have a grave. They also forbid us from having memorials for him." My brother's story is more or less the story of the other ones too. Since the families of victims were denied any information of whereabouts of the graves of their loved ones, they decided to go to Khabaran wasteland where they knew the government had been burying some executed political prisoners from the past years. When the families first visited Khabaran after the massacre of 1988, they found part of bodies of those buried in shallow mass graves sticking out of the ground. The families took some pictures of the atrocity around them. Part of the head and face of a young man was lying in the dirt. The hand of someone was hanging in the air, and there was pieces of clothing sticking out of the soil. These pictures illustrate the length a brutal government is willing to go to eliminate its opponents. The first time I went to the cemetery of Khabaran, I did not have high expectations. Knowing the government of Iran, I knew it won't be a pleasant place, but seeing it broke my heart. Even after that, they had done injustice to our loved ones. There was nothing in this wasteland, no trees, no flowers, not even stones, just dirt, nothing other than dirt. Every year, and despite continuous attempts at suppression on the part of Islamic Republic government, the families of the victims have honored their memory by gathering in Khabaran cemetery. As a result of the persistent efforts of the mothers of Khabaran and support from activists and intellectuals, Amnesty International have recognized prison massacre, and Khabaran cemetery and the September 1st have become associated with commemorating the victims of the massacre of 1988 and gross violations of human rights in Iran. On May 8, 2014, the mothers of Khabaran were invited to South Korea and received the 2014 Gwonjo Prize for Human Rights. Tragically, Amnesty International and United Nations do not have the power or desire to bring forth litigations against the Islamic Republic of Iran for their crimes. Therefore, in 2007, a group of Iranian activists composed of families of those executed in the 1980s, former political prisoners, human rights activists, and lawyers, created Iran Tribunal modeling after Russell Tribunal as an alternative mechanism for justice. The aim of this campaign was to bring to light the killings of political prisoners and to condemn the actions of the Islamic Republic of Iran for their heinous crimes against the citizens in the 1980s. Iran Tribunal created a pro bono legal team of experienced lawyers from countries such as South Africa, Belgium, Germany, Canada, United States of America, United Kingdom, and Iran.